to our webinar. I like to call them our chats, directly with something that's in the minds and the lives of all of us for the last 18, going on 19 months, if not more. My math, let me count my math. My name is Dr. Eric Griggs, and I'll be your moderator for the evening. I'm the Community Medicine Director at Access Health Louisiana and a health educator here in New Orleans. I also happen to be the National COVID Chair for the 100 Black Men of America. The 100 Black Men of America, in conjunction with Pfizer, are presenting our webinar tonight on building vaccine confidence for COVID-19 vaccines in adolescents. Our adolescents are our teenagers, right? But we're building confidence in all of us. We have an excellent panel here tonight. We have Doctors Tracy Fu and Dr. Julie Kittlesrud. They're both vaccine medical directors for Pfizer Vaccines, U.S. Medical Affairs. If you will, my colleagues, ladies, please introduce yourselves. And we'll start with a presentation. And then what will happen is, after the presentation, we got some questions from the community that are just geared up and ready to go. Dr. Kittlesrud, will you start?
Yes, actually, I'm Julie Kittlesrud, and I am Field Medical Director with Vaccines for Pfizer. I am fairly new to Pfizer, and I actually joined during COVID in August. And my background is as a nurse practitioner, and I have a PhD in nursing and worked in genetics for over 20 years and clinical drug research. So I was excited to join Pfizer during this time. I'll let Tracy go ahead and introduce herself, and then I'll begin our presentation.
Thanks, Julie, and thank you, Dr. Griggs. Yes, I'm Tracy Fu. I am a Vaccines Medical Director for Pfizer. I'm located in the Pacific Northwest, outside of Portland, Oregon. My background is as a physician in preventive medicine and public health. So vaccines are near and dear to my heart. And happy to be here with you all this evening, and hope to share some helpful information for us all as we are kind of navigating this pandemic and the recent challenges that we're engaged in right now. So I'll turn it back over to Julie, who's going to get us started, and I will share my screen, and we'll kind of go through some slides to start with. There we go.
All right. Well, since we've already done our introductions, I'll just say that there we go. We'll go to the first slide. So let's talk about vaccines in general. We'll start there because really the impact of vaccines on the 21st century is incredible. And you can see this table, and on the left-hand side, you can see the diseases. Then you can see the morbidity or the death rate in the 20th century. And this is the annual death rate. The numbers are astounding on some of these. 200,000 deaths for pertussis. For measles, look at that, 5,000. So then if you compare those to the reported cases in 2017, you can see what a huge reduction those are. And that's due to vaccines. So you can see the impact that vaccines can have on our health. We certainly know, hopefully we can get rid of all of these things and be at zero for measles and all of those others as well. There are certainly small pockets that kind of pop up, and that's due to little areas of people who don't want to have the vaccines. And so if you look at that, you can see small little pockets that pop up. Next slide, please. So we definitely have a great impact with vaccines, but how does that happen? So let's talk about herd immunity a little bit. Herd immunity, or what they call sometimes community immunity occurs when a high percentage of the community is immune to the disease or has been vaccinated. And so that makes the spread of the disease unlikely. So on the top row there, you can see the person in the red is spreading the disease to those people in the blue. Eventually, those people in the blue are going to get sick and spread it, of course, to several more people. And on that last one on the top, you can see that either, pretty much all of them are sick or have had the disease, except for one person. And now on this bottom row, you can see we're starting to reach herd immunity here, where one person who's infected can't give it to someone who has already had it or has had the vaccine, but they can transmit it to those people who have not had the vaccine. Eventually, we get to the point where the virus fails to spread and it fails to persist in the population, and that's that last slide on the bottom, or picture on the bottom. Let's go to the next slide. So let's talk about COVID. COVID vaccine, of course, has been out now since about December, more so starting in January with most areas. And right now we are at about 49% of the population that's fully vaccinated. And that means having had one of the Johnson & Johnson vaccines or two of the mRNA vaccines. 56.9% have had at least one dose. But I think it's important to look at the numbers of fully vaccinated people in the population, because that's how we're going to get to herd immunity. We also have a population, of course, going up towards our 65-year-olds who have 79.8% been vaccinated with both doses. And then, of course, it goes down from there because we started with our 65-year-olds. So they definitely have had a little bit more time to have their vaccine, and they also had a large motivation. And we'll see that in some of our other slides. So let's move on to the next one. So in a poll that was conducted by the Kaiser Family Foundation, they asked, would you get a COVID-19 vaccine? And so this poll has been going on since December. And if you look at December compared to June, you can certainly see the difference. We have 65% now who have already gotten a vaccine in this poll, and fewer people who would get it as soon as possible because they already have. And we only have 10% compared to our 39% that would wait and see before they get their COVID vaccine. But importantly also is that those people who would only get it if required or definitely not get it has pretty much remained about the same. So as the rate of increase in COVID-19 vaccine uptake slows, 2/3 of adults are still reporting receiving at least one dose of the vaccine, which is good. So let's go on to the next slide. So a continuation of that poll shows that those who are the most open and already have received vaccine are Democrats in this poll. And if you look at the bottom on the opposite side are Republicans, who have only 52%. And they actually have the highest definitely not percentage, along with rural residents. But those who are more open to receiving the vaccine are older age, so they are 65 and older, college graduates, and urban residents. And if you'd like to go to the next one. So the newness of the COVID-19 vaccines and worries about side effects are top reasons why people are still slightly hesitant to get vaccinated. And so the top one is that the vaccine is too new, and we'll talk about that in this presentation as well. But they're also worried about side effects, and they don't want to, or they just don't want to get the vaccine. Other things that people have said is they don't trust the government, or they don't feel like they need the COVID-19 vaccine. Next slide. So we've certainly seen a wide variety of feelings about vaccination in that survey. But when you look at vaccine confidence, and especially during a pandemic, there are four main key determinants of confidence in vaccines. And that would be the attitudes and beliefs, trust, information environment, and the healthcare provider confidence in vaccines and the ability to communicate about vaccines. So science and medicine are being challenged by an underlying level of mistrust and misinformation and a lack of understanding of the risks. So lack of clear communication during a pandemic can lead to confusion. We're also kind of going with the evolving scientific knowledge. And as that changes, we interpret things a little bit differently, and it feels like we are becoming uncertain in our scientific community. So information overload also can lead to pandemic fatigue. Next slide, please. So let's look at vaccine attitudes. We see vaccine attitudes as a continuum, and it ranges from those who completely accept vaccines, they agree and don't even question about getting their vaccines, or on the opposite end, you have those who completely reject the vaccine. They don't even want to talk about it. And then there's those people in the middle, and those include the people who are late vaccinators. They kind of just want to see how everyone else does first before they get their vaccine. And then there's those who are just a little bit hesitant. They have maybe a couple questions that they'd like to ask, but otherwise, they might change their mind. So often these people in this blue box are interested in seeking information from their providers. And they may choose to vaccinate based on information from a trusted care provider or a family member. There's many people, or maybe even seeing someone they idolize getting a vaccine. Let's go to the next slide, please. So vaccine confidence used to be lack of hesitancy or vaccine hesitancy. And so the CDC actually changed confidence to frame it in a better light. So it's suggested as a way for parents and healthcare providers and others to frame vaccination. So what's involved in vaccine confidence? So it refers to the trust that parents or healthcare providers have in the recommended immunizations, in the providers who administer the vaccines, and in the process. And that process includes the development of the vaccine, the licensure, the manufacturing, and who's recommending it to you. Next slide, please. So our goal in building confidence is to accelerate the development of the vaccine during the pandemic without compromising safety, efficacy, or product quality. And this is by using sound science and meeting the regulatory standards that are set. And so in thinking about vaccine confidence, being aware of how vaccines are developed during a pandemic is key to understanding and building trust. Also, understanding the rigorous process in place for the scientific evaluation of the vaccines, looking at the strict regulatory requirements and understanding what those are, and seeing what the life cycle management of the vaccine is. In addition to that, the programs in place to monitor safety. Many people have a lot of questions about safety, and certainly it's feels better to know that we are continually monitoring safety, and that our government resources, and we'll talk about those in a little bit, that they're continually monitoring safety. Next slide, please. So let's first talk about the biggest question. So the biggest question we hear is, oh, this was developed too fast. And how did they do that so fast? They must have skipped steps. And so here's the different paradigms of how we develop vaccines. And what I would like to point out mostly in this slide is that there were no steps that were skipped. But because of the situation, of course, we had a lot of people who were becoming ill. So we certainly had a patient population to service. And we had many volunteers for our studies. And so those studies go by quite quickly when you have volunteers. So recruitment efforts for these trials were minimal because we had a lot of excitement about getting these vaccines. So sometimes that's what happens with the traditional paradigm, where you see the phase 1, which is the safety data. The phase 2 is the dose selection. And phase 3 is the efficacy study. So how well it works for the disease that you're studying. And then it goes on to licensure. So in a pandemic paradigm, the phase 1, 2, and 3 were done as one large study. It started as a phase 1 study, which are smaller studies. It added more people into the phase 2 for that part of the study, and then expanded even more for the phase 3 study. So they were done very similarly to a normal phase 1, phase 2, or phase 3. The other thing I want to point out is that normally we would go until licensure. And because it was such an emergency, we went until we met the criteria for the emergency authorization. And so that changes that paradigm just a little bit and increases the speed that we can get the vaccine to a larger, broader population. The other thing is that normally, during normal times, we would wait to start the manufacturing. As soon as that dose was chosen, large-scale manufacturing ramped up. And so that began a lot earlier in this process, so that we were able to, once we received emergency authorization, get that all of those doses out to all of the clinics and the health departments so that vaccination can start. If you go to the next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about what emergency use authorization is, because this is something new, I think, for many of us. During a health emergency, this is when an emergency use authorization can be put in place. So it allows an unapproved medical product to be used in an emergency when there's no other treatments. So there are no approved or available alternatives. So it's issued only after several statutory requirements are met, and the FDA makes the determination that the known and potentially benefit of the product, when used to diagnose, prevent, or treat serious or life-threatening disease, outweighs the known potential risk of the product. So for a vaccine for which there's no manufacturing information, issuance of an EUA may be appropriate once studies have demonstrated the safety and effectiveness of the vaccine. But before the manufacturer has submitted for FDA complete biologic license application. So normally we would wait. There's a length of time that a company would submit the application for the biologics license application, and with the EUA is issued prior to the BLA. If you want to go on to the next slide. So during this time, of course, everything is unprecedented. We had an unprecedented situation, we had unprecedented acceleration, and unprecedented transparency. And transparency, of course, is a driver of trust. So the FDA, CDC, and vaccine manufacturers really decided to be very transparent about what they were doing and the processes they were going through. So let's talk about some of those things. So the FDA created and posted guidance on the COVID-19 vaccine requirements for the EUA. So that included what efficacy the vaccine needed to reach, the safety information and manufacturing requirements that they had. They also convened an independent scientific committee, which is the VRBPAC, and that stands for the Vaccines and Related Biological Products Advisory Committee. So they got together and evaluated the safety and efficacy of the data to support the EUA. They thoroughly reviewed and authorized treatments of the vaccine for use during the pandemic and have systems in place to monitor the safety post-authorization. So the CDC, which also committed to openly evaluating the scientific data and making recommendations for after the authorization, they convened the ACIP, which is a group of volunteers who have day jobs and then do this along with it, to evaluate the different recommendations for these vaccines. They also monitored and evaluate the safety post-authorization, and you've probably heard some of the evaluations. All of our new recommendations, every time something changes, it's because data has been analyzed and the CDC has looked at it and given us better or different recommendations. So also vaccine manufacturers, it's really unprecedented. I'll use that word again, that they put the protocols on their websites. Normally those protocols are only for those sites that are doing the testing. So those were very accessible to everyone. They were transparent about their study enrollment, and their progress reports were posted on their websites. They also did interim results. They had interim results evaluated by the independent review committees. And even more spectacularly, there were 9 CEOs who were looking at COVID-19 vaccines manufacturing, and they made a historic pledge to make the safety and well-being of vaccinated individuals the top priority in development. So let's go to the next slide. So this is a review of the safety systems that are in place. After authorization of a vaccine, if there are any adverse events, essentially any side effects, those are reported into the VAERS system. Excuse me. So this is an early warning system that helps the CDC and the FDA to monitor side effects. Along with that, we have the vaccine safety data link. And of course, the FDA BEST and the CISA and the FDA CMS data monitoring, and the FDA Sentinel initiative. These systems have all been in place for all of our vaccines. But what is new is the expanded safety monitoring systems. The VSafe system is actually a proactive system, whereas our VAERS systems are I'm missing the word. The VAERS system accepts information that's voluntarily added to the system, and the VSafe system sends out questions to the participants in that program. So this is a text messaging program that you can sign up for after you've had your vaccine. Let's go to the next slide.
Okay.
So I'm going to
go ahead. Sorry. so I'm going to take over here and talk a little bit about the importance of COVID-19 vaccination for adolescents. So it's important to realize, so thanks Julie for the overview of kind of how we went through vaccine development, especially during the pandemic. And it's important to know that, you know, for all the different populations that the vaccine is being studied in, that all of those steps, all of those phases of trials are done, and all of the safety monitoring and everything that Julie talked about is being followed for all the different subgroups or the different age groups that are being added into the emergency use authorization. So I'm going to talk a little bit more specifically about adolescents, as I know that's definitely a kind of ongoing concern, especially for your group.
Dr. Fu, can you
Sure.
define adolescents for our audience?
Sure. Yes. So good question. So we kind of you kind of mentioned at the beginning about teenagers. In this case, and you probably have heard this, you know, all over the news and everything. But in this case, we're talking about adolescents as 12 years of age and older. So a lot of the slides will talk about kind of the 12 to 17 age group, because we kind of think about adults being 18 and older. So we're kind of focusing in on the 12 to 17. So some people might consider that a little bit preteen or teen, into the kind of the traditional teenage years. So yeah, thanks for that clarification. So we're going to share just a few slides, just because one of the questions that we always get around adolescents is, well, kids in general, kids don't get sick from COVID, right? Kids don't have any serious illness with COVID. And that's one of the reasons that sometimes people say, well, you know, adults should get the vaccine, but adolescents or teenagers don't necessarily need it. So just wanted to share some data, and these were from the CDC, but on the right-hand side, you can see there's been, you know, and this is data as of April 30th, so it's even a little older. But there's been over 1.5 million cases of COVID among adolescents 12 to 17 years of age. And then you can see the darker blue line here is the older adolescents, so the 16 to 17-year-olds. And the light blue is 12 to 15-year-olds. And you can see this is from March of last year to April of this year, and just shows, you know, kind of similar to the adults, you know, when we had our spikes and, you know, our surges in the summer of last year, where cases went up in adolescents, and then last kind of right over the holidays, the fall, winter timeframe, where there was quite a bit of cases in the adolescents, and then, you know, this ends in April. So the other thing to consider too is that as more older adults have been vaccinated, we're actually seeing a higher proportion of cases in these teenagers. So of all of the cases that we're seeing, less are in older adults and more are in our younger children and adolescents. So something to kind of think about. Another thing which I thought was interesting, so if you remember back, we had the H1N1 flu back in 2009, 2010. And, at that time, that was kind of the worst pandemic that we had seen. So this blue line is actually, this is looking at hospitalizations in these adolescents, so 12 to 17 years. The blue line is looking at during that H1N1 pandemic. And you can see the hospitalizations went up and then they kind of stabilized, and then there really wasn't anymore, didn't really go up very high. But this yellow line is for COVID-19 over time. And again, this is data as of kind of like the end of April. So we don't have the most recent data, but you can see that the hospitalizations went up and it just kind of steadily continuing to increase above the levels from the H1N1 pandemic. So we are definitely seeing hospitalizations among these adolescents, and worse than during the H1N1 pandemic. And we always have to remember, especially our high-risk adolescents and teens. So I know this is really busy slide, but what's kind of, I would point out here in the middle, is that 61, so almost 2/3 of the hospitalized adolescents with COVID-19 had some sort of underlying medical condition. So you can see on the left here with this graph, the most common medical conditions of these kids or teens that were hospitalized for COVID was obesity, asthma, developmental delay, and diabetes, either type 1 or type 2. So these make up unfortunately, these are the conditions that we see, in our kids and teens, and puts them at higher risk of being hospitalized with COVID. So it's definitely something you think about when you're talking to teens or their parents, to consider, that they may be higher risk if they have some sort of underlying medical condition. And this is just kind of a little bit of a summary. And again, this is as of kind of the end of April. So there were over 1.5 million reported cases and over 13,000 hospitalizations up until kind of the end of April in these teens. And you may have heard in kind of the media and stuff, there's something called MIS, which is multi-system inflammatory syndrome, which is kind of a severe complication of COVID, where kids can be very sick. They, are often, they're usually in the hospital. It can be a long recovery time. And actually, they've looked at how these, what kind of illness these kids have, and it actually seems to be more severe in adolescents, so those, kind of in the teenage years, than in younger children. So another good reason why we need to protect our adolescents. And then you always have to remember on the bottom of the slide that adolescents are part of community. They're part of our household. They're part of our families. And they can actually contribute as well to transmission of COVID in both the household and community. And then we always worry about anyone who's, vulnerable or at risk for COVID. So anybody who's older, anybody with any serious medical conditions, immunocompromised folks. So if an adolescent is in a home or community with those people who are at high risk, if they get COVID, they can spread that to those people who can get very sick. So just a few things to think about as when you're talking to adolescents or teenagers or their parents about COVID and getting vaccinated. So how do we build vaccine confidence? So Julie talked about, what is vaccine confidence and why it's so important. So how do we build that especially in our adolescents and parents? So as you know, the COVID-19 vaccines has been authorized for ages 12 and up. And that happened kind of in April, the April timeframe where April-May timeframe where the vaccine went through the emergency use authorization process and was authorized by FDA for children 12 and up. And this is just some data similar to what Julie presented, but this is just looking at those I shouldn't say kids, teens, ages 12 to 17. And this just shows the time frame. So from April, when kind of that authorization first happened, not too many kids had been vaccinated. But you see here as of June, which is the latest data that they were able to pull, about 34% of people had their child already vaccinated. 8% were planning to, very soon. So, they've actually been able to vaccinate quite a bit of adolescents already, even in just a short amount of time. In thinking about, when you're talking to parents and teens about getting vaccinated, I just wanted to share some background information. So this is some data that CDC presented. So they did a survey with parents, and among a couple of surveys, anywhere from about 46 to 60% of parents said they plan to get their children vaccinated. And listed here is some of the reasons why they may not vaccinate. So this is just for reference, because I think it's helpful to understand, where people are coming from, in order to, know how to talk to them or what kind of conversations to have. So some of them, very similar to what Julie presented, they're concerned about safety. They're concerned about the vaccine being developed too quickly. There's the word trust. They don't trust the information being published. They're not sure they're going to trust it right away. They don't have enough information. That last one, I like to think that is something that we all can have a piece in of, we can be the trusted source of information and provide that information so that they do have enough information to make the choice to get vaccinated. And then not surprisingly on the bottom, parents' attitudes towards vaccination are very similar when you think about their intent to vaccinate their children. And so sometimes it's similar or slightly lower intent to vaccinate their children, depending on how they feel about getting vaccinated themselves. And then this is just some additional info from that survey. So, there's a lot of differences in terms of, intent to have their kids vaccinated. There's differences by parents' gender, age, income. There's some, in these particular surveys, fathers were more willing to vaccinate their children than mothers. Older mothers were more willing to vaccinate their kids than younger mothers. And then there's differences by income as well. So things that I'm sure you kind of deal with when you're talking to your teens every day. And then we also have to consider race and ethnicity. And this is some data from some surveys that were done in the early part of the year, looking at the differences in intention for children to receive the COVID-19 vaccine by race and ethnicity. And you can see from these two surveys, the numbers are a little bit different, but you can see that there are differences between, and the colors are down here on the bottom here of the slide, but you can see that there are differences between different race and ethnicity groups. So what do we do now? So we have all this data, we have all this information. Hopefully you guys feel a little more comfortable about, how the vaccine's been developed and what kind of steps and how safety is being monitored. But what do we do? How do we talk about this with parents, with our teens, with our family, with our friends? I think anytime you're in a position of trust or authority, many of you all are mentors, you are that trusted source for information, and they're going to listen to what you have to say. And that's such a wonderful opportunity to provide factual information, to provide, positive information, this more confident approach rather than, that very kind of hesitant, like, oh, I'm not sure, So this next couple slides just have some information on, some things that have been shown to be helpful in convincing people to get the vaccine. So this is based on adults, but I think some of it's very similar, for teenagers as well. Although they definitely are their own group. But this is looking at patients who are not vaccinated, or excuse me, adults who are not vaccinated, and they rated what messages would convince them to get vaccinated. So you can see the top 3 really focus on that the vaccines are effective. They're highly effective in preventing illness. So no one wants to get COVID, right? And right now we're all really, really worried. At least I am very worried about what's going on with the Delta variant and with the surge in cases. So letting people know that these vaccines are highly effective in preventing COVID illness. Similar to that, the vaccine will help protect you from getting sick. In kind of an extension of that, the vaccines help protect you from getting very sick in terms of needing to be hospitalized or even dying from COVID. And then the one that I think speaks to all of us, as Dr. Griggs was saying, we can't even keep track now. I think it's 18 or 19 months. It was January, I think, of last year. It feels like so much longer. But the other message that especially resonates with teens is that the quickest way to return to normal is for most people to get vaccinated. And as Julie shared in the beginning, so for fully vaccinated, we're still under 50% as a country for full vaccinated. So that's people either having 1 or 2 doses of the vaccine, depending on which vaccine they get. And to get that community immunity, where all the different people and how much it spreads and stuff, you really need to have a high percentage of people vaccinated. And with only 50% of people vaccinated right now, fully vaccinated, we are not at that level. And that is part of why we are seeing so much COVID disease right now and COVID illness. So some things to think about. These other messages are good to know as well, because they may help people make the decision to get vaccinated. Millions of people have been safely vaccinated. So, I mean, what was the number, I think, on the slide? I can't remember the exact number, 168 million or something like that. But millions and millions of people in the US and then also in the world. So many more in the world. And then, I think the other thing that, Julie mentioned trust, and I think trust is such an important thing in the vaccine conversation. But, having a doctor or health provider that you trust got the vaccine, or a close friend or family member got vaccinated. So sometimes even you as a mentor saying, hey, I got vaccinated, my family got vaccinated, that can be very powerful to people to say, hey, someone I know believes that they're safe and effective, and they got the vaccine and they're okay, and they're here talking to me about it. So in thinking about having conversations around vaccine confidence and talking about vaccines, so I'm not gonna, this is a long list, and I'm not going to go through all of them. But there's a couple main points to think about when you're talking to people about, especially with COVID vaccine. So, I think the second bullet there, be credible, be consistent and transparent. Feeling comfortable, we'll share some websites and that have some good, credible, factual information. But, get some information. There's lots of information out there, especially around adolescent vaccination and the information from a lot of trusted sources. Kind of read up on it, take a minute, understand, what the information is, and be able to answer questions of teens that are talking to you about vaccination. The fourth one there is expressing empathy and showing respect. I think that's kind of key just in general, and I'm sure that's part of your daily practice in kind of working in the mentoring relationship. But I think especially around vaccines, making sure to understand where people are coming from and respect where they're coming from, and still being able to have a conversation. And then acknowledging uncertainty. There is a lot of uncertainty, as Julie mentioned. We don't know what's happening. We don't know what's going to happen. But the best protection we have right now are these vaccines. And a couple other things, just tips. It's sometimes really helpful to just ask why are you concerned about this? What are your concerns? And sometimes it may be something really simple that you may be able to answer, and help someone understand what the factual information is, in order to make the decision to get vaccinated. Same thing, we talked about the information environment. Social media is a wonderful thing, but it can also be really, really difficult, for health topics like COVID. And there's been a lot of rumors and misinformation around COVID and the COVID vaccines. So, knowing that you're a trusted information source and being able to say, hey, that's not true. Here's the true information. Here's a credible resource to go to. And then, you can see those other things. I will kind of skip those other ones so we can get to some question and answers. But I think the last one is really important, and it's that I've never heard the term vaccination pride, but I think that's really coming out with COVID, because there's a lot of people posting on social media, I got my COVID vaccine, or wearing pins or stickers or whatever, but telling stories. And I think there's a lot of stories out there now. And I've seen some even recently of folks who didn't want to get the vaccine, were not going to get the vaccine, got COVID, and now are changing their minds. And sometimes those stories can really make a difference. And even as I was saying, sharing your story about yourself getting vaccinated, sometimes that can make a big difference, to someone that you're talking to. So just wanted to share that. And then, I think we just have a quick summary slide, which I won't spend a lot of time on. And then there's a few resources here. And I think Delmar was going to post a few websites as well, and we'll talk about those. But a couple of just trusted resources I would direct you to, especially around the adolescent population. So the CDC has great information. There we go, they're on the bottom. The CDC website has great information. They have a lot of frequently asked questions, a lot of information on, not only where to get vaccinated, but also just, all those questions that come up. The American Academy of Pediatrics is a group of pediatricians in the United States, and they have a ton of information specific to parents around not just COVID vaccine, but lots of different topics. But they have some great information, kind of especially geared towards those teens. They still see teenagers. And then you can kind of see the other ones there, and Delmar has put up a couple of websites there that we'll talk about a little bit more. So thanks for letting us kind of share some information with you, and I will turn it over to Dr. Griggs, and we'll get started with a question and answers. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you both for that presentation. We can't say that it's for a lack of knowledge. There's a lot of data, and there's a lot of really helpful tips in talking with teens and talking with families. I'm going to get right to it. There's an elephant in the room, and I'm not talking about a plane. It's called Delta. Why is this Delta variant? Two-part question. It's directly from the audience, believe it or not. Why is this Delta variant so concerning, of course? And the second thing is, we've been told and noticed that the symptoms of Delta have changed. So is that something that we should be aware of? We understand that it's looking more like a cold, and what should we do about it? So Delta.
Absolutely.
Either of you can start.
Delta has definitely been a concern. And we know that from June 19th to July 23rd, we have had a 300% increase in COVID cases. And it's primarily driven, in fact, it's 70% of Delta variant. So the Delta variant is very contagious. And that's one of the things that we need to be very cautious of, because it's more contagious than our previous strain. So what can we do? Definitely is important to get vaccinated first. Make sure that you get vaccinated, and if it's a 2-shot series that you're getting, make sure that you're getting that second series or that second dose. That is incredibly important because that boosts the immune system to fight against the Delta variant. And also, we just heard, yesterday, the CDC reviewed some of this data and made the recommendation that wearing masks is still probably going to be the best thing that we can do to prevent transmission of the Delta variant. And so, and especially for those, even those who are vaccinated, and especially for those who are unvaccinated. I also know they put out they had a little, so if you get vaccinated, your risk of infection is 3.5 times lower. Your risk of getting ill is 8 times lower, and your risk of being hospitalized or dying is 25% or 25 times lower. So vaccines are really where we need to go.
So what you're saying is that if you get vaccinated, you're protected. Your risk of contracting COVID-19 Delta variant is low. Your risk of getting illness, getting sick, actually sick, is even lower. The risk of getting so sick you have to go to the hospital is even lower than that, and the risk of dying is even lower than that. So come on in, the water's fine. Everyone, we need to get vaccinated. The second part of that question, though, was about people are concerned. At one point, there was a term called anosmia. I can't smell, I can't taste, and it wasn't a part of the original symptoms. But now I've seen certain lists where it might be the number 9 most common symptom or number 12. What are the symptoms? What should people be looking out for in themselves or in teens or adolescents or just in general as symptoms of the Delta variant?
Absolutely. Well, I think it's if you have changes in your health, you need to be visiting with your provider. Your providers are quite knowledgeable about the COVID vaccine. Sniffles, those are symptoms, headaches, sinus issues, respiratory issues. There's a whole gamut of issues now. And the best thing to do is talk to your provider and work with your provider.
Yeah, I think one of the concerns too, like you're saying, Julie, is that, sometimes it can be a more mild disease, so we think of COVID as being, these people are sick, they're having trouble breathing, all that kind of stuff. It may not get to that level. So like Julie is saying is, it's really important if you're having symptoms, any of these symptoms, the kind of typical, you may think it's a cold, that kind of thing. Definitely reach out to your healthcare provider, and they may want to consider testing for COVID.
So that's excellent. And as we know, our recommendations are changing, but we're talking about adolescents. What do we do in a situation where we have a teenager's like, I'm not doing it, mom or dad, and you can't make me? What do you recommend we do? Because they're not going to care about the data. You can tell me all this, I'm not doing it. What can we do? What other things can you suggest that might help change your mind, particularly with school coming up? The kids are going back to school. Either.
Yeah, I could start. So one of the things and one of the messages that's really resonated with teens is that idea of getting back to normal. So, I mean, our teens, a lot of them missed school last year. They were doing online school. They missed their friends. They missed their graduations. They missed all kinds of in-person things that are associated with school. So I think, one of the messages that can, especially as we're thinking about going back to school and with what's going on right now, is to really, emphasize that, getting the vaccine is really going to get us hopefully back to that point where you can do all those activities at school. And you don't have to worry about getting sick. You don't have to worry about your friends getting sick. So really emphasizing that getting back to normal message, I think, has really been shown to resonate with teens especially.
So I know we kind of assume it because we're all on the same team. We're the vaccinated. Do these vaccines if you're vaccinated, are you protected against? Is it protective against the Delta variant? We know the answer, but we got to say it. We got numbers and data, and somebody's got to say it other than me.
So the data is still being collected. So there's always data being collected. So the early data that I've seen has shown that there is protection with the Delta variant. So there is still the recommendation is still that anyone who's eligible to get vaccinated, so 12 and up, if you're not vaccinated or if you haven't gotten your second shot, to get the vaccine now. I mean, that's what CDC is saying. They're emphasizing this urgent need for everyone to get vaccinated, because the more disease that spreads, so the more even the Delta variant spreads in our community, the higher risk that we have for new mutations and new variants. So we're all talking about Delta right now. A couple months ago, we were talking about, I think it was, they changed the names.
Well,
so
B117,
we were, the B117. So we were all talking about B117 a few months ago, and that was the concern. Well, that took over, so that's all we had in the U.S. And now, as Julie said, within the last month, Delta has taken over. So now we pretty much have all Delta in the U.S. So the more virus that's out there, the more chance for mutation. So the more we get people vaccinated and protected so that we get that virus level down, the less chance of those variants developing. So, the next one, who knows? I don't know. We want to stick. I mean, we don't like the Delta variant, but we don't want the next one. And I don't know my Greek alphabet, but whatever the next one's going to be.
we got it. Excellent question in the chat. We've been talking Delta and COVID. We had a very pleasant, in a relative term, flu season, right? The question is, how concerned should we be in light of Delta about the upcoming flu season, and plot twist, whether or not we should get a flu shot in addition to our vaccine?
Well, I'm biased. I think everyone who's eligible should get a flu shot 6 months and up. But I'm a public health doc by passion. But anyway, I think, with the upcoming flu season, there's a couple concerns. So one is, last year, as you're saying, the flu season wasn't too bad, mostly because we were all wearing masks. We were social distancing. Nobody was going out.
We were washing our hands. Please wash your hands.
We were washing our hands. And I think even the number of people that got flu shots went up, because there was a lot of concern last season about, what if we have what did they call it? There was a term that they were talking about, having a surge of flu. Twin pandemic, yes. Yes, because we have to have a fancy name for everything. So yes, there was all the twindemic, discussion. So everybody was really worried. I can't predict anything, but I think this year we, with less mask usage, less social distancing, potentially less hand washing, and yes, I think everybody who's eligible 6 months and up should get a flu shot, or the flu vaccine, whichever one you choose to get, and continue all of the hand washing and staying home when you're sick and all, and I think with Delta, the social distancing and masking, I think, are coming back into fashion as well. So we'll just have to see. But I think, especially if you have high risk conditions, if you're at higher risk for severe illness from the flu, definitely need to get the flu shot.
Yeah. So I think we're all in agreement there, correct? Yes.
Sorry,
absolutely.
I'm very passionate about the flu vaccine.
So I know that we're running a little short on time, but we have questions, and I want to make sure that they're answered. A lot of people are concerned, not just teenagers, about it was an excellent slide that you put up. But can you explain it in a term that I could explain it to a 12 or 13-year-old when they tell me, well, it's not approved, that's only emergency use authorized. So what's the difference? In 12-year-old terms, I don't know. I would say Harry Potter, but it makes me seem old. I don't know. In a way that can explain it.
Julie, do you want to take that one? Sorry,
Sure,
Julie has a teenager at home, so
I have a teenager at home, and she has certainly quizzed me on all of these things. So, the way I explained it to her was that an emergency use is just that. We're in an emergency. We're in a pandemic. This is happening. It happened very fast, and we didn't have any medications for it. And so we went through all of the processes that you normally do to get it authorized so that we could go out and we made sure it was safe before we gave it to people to take. And getting a normal license for a vaccine takes multiple years. And so this was one way we were able to get that medication out, be safe getting it out, make sure that it was an effective medication to get out before getting a licensure. So it's a method that the government and the FDA have so that we can get those medications out quickly. So that and she took that as a good answer. So
well, it goes right along with what you were saying. If she was like, okay, then you did a good job, right? Right along with what you were saying at your portion of the presentation, there were no steps skipped. It was ensured that it was safe. It's just that it was a time thing, and let's go. And we had enough people for the trials. Like, we've never seen this many people. I do not wish a pandemic on anyone, but having experience in clinical trials and public health, I wish that we could get this many people enrolled in clinical trials.
That fast. Yeah.
Exactly.
I'm looking at the clock. What's that? Yeah.
I was going to say, I think between the 3 vaccines that are authorized in the U.S., I think there was over 100,000 people involved in those clinical trials, and that was just the initial ones.
It was over 100,000, and it was almost like a Shrek and Donkey, like, pick me.
Yeah. Everybody was trying to figure out how to get into the trial. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Because we wanted to be safe. And that's what we're all working towards. We know the kids are going to school. Our babies are treasures, and we want to protect ourselves, of course, but we want to make sure that they're most protected. We know that we want people. It's advised. The CDC is advising now that people wear masks. The kids wear masks to protect. This Delta variant is a lot more transmissible and infectious. If you had, you do have a platform. As we're closing up, I want to give you each time to give a message, poignant message to our audience about getting their kids vaccinated, where they can go for help, to know that we're always here, to help us get out of these things so we can get back to normal. I sound like a teenager, right? I did good. Teenager, yeah. I want to get back to normal. Yeah.
Hey, we're all with you.
Either one of you.
Oh, absolutely. So I think the biggest message, actually, I think the biggest thing to do with our teens is listen to what they have to say and be empathetic, and then offer your fantastic mentoring skills and the knowledge that you've gained today, that our vaccines have gone through multiple trials. They have had a large venue of use and are very safe and will help them get back to normal.
Thank you, Dr. Fu.
Well, that's great. So it's always hard to go second after someone says something wonderful. But I think, to echo what Julie said, I think, and I think I might have said this a couple times, the best protection we have right now against COVID is these vaccines. So I think at this point, we're all, the 3 of us are all vaccinated, and just encourage you and your families and anyone who's eligible right now to go get the vaccine. It's easy, it's safe, it's effective, it's free right now. You can go pretty much anywhere. They are they're not only giving vaccine away, they're giving away gift cards and all kinds of stuff so you can get your vaccine and some extra freebies depending on where you go.
Yeah, we were giving away catfish plates in New Orleans. Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, I should have gotten my vaccine there. But really and truly, I mean, I just, this is the best protection that we have, and ahead of, in the face of right now this Delta variant, and it's scary to think about, your kids going back to school, and just in general, all of us being out in public, follow the guidance that's out there. Get your vaccine, continue to wash your hands, wear your mask, and social distance when appropriate. We can get through this, but it's going to take all of us working together to, really kind of get us through this. And I thank you all for what you do every day. And we are here. There's lots of resources out there for you as you're, talking to kids. And hopefully some of the things that we've shared tonight will be helpful. And feel free to reach out to any of us and through the organization. And yes, thank you.
So on behalf of the 100 Black men, our Health and Wellness Committee, and our organization as a whole, we'd like to thank both of you for helping us help others. Folks, we want people to remember it's not punishment, it's protection. Vaccine, it's a shot and it's a mask and it's staying away, but it's for all of our own good, our collective good. We want to thank you, our audience, for joining in. Hope we've had a fruitful discussion. We thank you for all your questions. And with that, we'd like to say good night and get vaccinated.
Yes. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.